September 1996, Las Vegas. A black BMW, a white Cadillac, and a hail of bullets that silenced one of the most powerful voices in hip-hop history. This is the mystery of Tupac Shakur. Harlem, New York, 1971. The streets were alive with the rhythm of the city, the pulse of subway trains, the chatter of vendors, the distant hum of sirens weaving through the noise like a constant reminder of life's precariousness. Amid the concrete and the chaos, a child was born who would one day carry the voice of a generation, whose words would haunt the world long after his departure. He was named Lassane Parish Crooks at birth, though the name would later change to Tupac Amaru Shakur, after Tupac Amaru II, the 18th century Peruvian revolutionary. From the start, his life was steeped in history and conflict, a reflection of both the struggles he would inherit and the fire he would ignite. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a force unto herself, a woman of intelligence, bravery, and rebellion. She was a member of the Black Panther Party, fiercely dedicated to the cause of civil rights and social justice. And she imbued Tupac with a consciousness that was both revolutionary and deeply empathetic. Yet life was never easy. The Shakur household was turbulent. Money was scarce. Danger was a constant companion. Afeni, though protective and loving, faced her own battles, arrests, imprisonments, and the endless scrutiny of authorities who sought to quash the Panthers' message. Tupac's early memories were a mix of love and instability, of being cradled in a mother's arms while the world outside threatened to crush them both. Despite hardship, the boy showed signs of brilliance from an early age. He was curious, sensitive, and observant, absorbing everything around him. The rhythms of Harlem streets, the stories of oppression and resistance, the poetry and cadence of spoken word. He excelled in school, particularly in the arts. Acting became a refuge. At the age of 10, he enrolled in the Baltimore School for the Arts, studying acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet. It was there that the first glimpses of his duality appeared. Tupac was both fighter and artist, a young man capable of immense aggression, yet also profound vulnerability. His teachers noticed his charisma, the way he could command a room with words. Even as he wrestled with the chaos of his youth in Baltimore, Tupac's world expanded. He met friends who shared his love of music and art, and he began to write poetry with a passion that bordered on obsession. Themes of injustice, poverty, and survival dominated his early writings, alongside reflections on love, hope, and the fragility of life. Even then, he seemed to carry two realities, one of youthful innocence and one of premature awareness of the world's cruelty. The streets he had left in Harlem were never far from his mind. He carried their stories with him, translating them into art. By the late 1980s, Tupac returned to the Bay Area, a place vibrant with energy and creativity, yet fraught with gang violence and social tension. Oakland and San Francisco were the crucible where he would forge his identity as a rapper and poet. He joined the group Digital Underground as a backup dancer and rapper, a stepping stone into the music industry that would later catapult him to superstardom. Even in those early performances, his intensity was palpable. He moved with a rhythm that was part choreography, part raw emotion, as though every gesture carried the weight of his life's experiences. Tupac's first recordings revealed a voice both commanding and vulnerable. He rapped not just about parties or superficial bravado, but about injustice, systemic oppression, and the struggles of Black youth in America. He became a mirror to the city, reflecting its pain, its beauty, its contradictions. The audience responded. He was electric, charismatic, and unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths, even as the world around him demanded conformity. But Tupac's rise was never simple. His life, like his art, was a study in contradictions. He was loyal yet volatile, gentle yet prone to fury. Encounters with the law punctuated his early years' minor infractions, altercations, and a growing reputation for being dangerous, unpredictable. The media began to take notice, not yet for the music, but for the controversy swirling around the young man who spoke truth with fire. By the early 1990s, Tupac had released his debut album, Tupac Now, a record that shocked many with its raw depictions of police brutality, systemic inequality, and the struggles of inner-city life. Critics were polarized. Some called it inflammatory, dangerous even. Others recognized its brilliance, the voice of a generation demanding to be heard. Tupac was no longer just a local sensation. He was becoming a symbol, a lightning rod for admiration and fear alike. Even as fame began to take root, Tupac's personal life remained complicated. Romantic entanglements, family obligations, and friendships were all threads in a tapestry of chaos. Yet, in every decision, every lyric, every interview, he seemed to live with purpose. He wanted to be more than a rapper. He wanted to be a messenger, a poet, a revolutionary. And the world, even if unready, was starting to notice. The early 1990s also brought danger. Rivalries began to simmer, tensions between different factions of the rap industry. Simmering resentments, whispered threats, and the beginnings of the infamous East Coast versus West Coast divide. Tupac's persona, amplified by both his talent and his confrontational nature, became a magnet for controversy. Every appearance, every track, every confrontation with authority hinted at the storm gathering on the horizon. By the time Tupac released Strictly for My N.I.G.G.A.Z., his second album, he had become both a hero and a target. Fans adored him for his candor, his intelligence, his courage to speak what others only whispered. Enemies lurked, some in the industry, some on the streets, and some in the shadows of politics and law enforcement. Every performance was electric. Every speech carried weight. Tupac's rise was meteoric, yet shadowed by danger, and with each passing day, the world around him seemed to grow simultaneously larger and more threatening. In those formative years, Tupac's life embodied contradictions: art and violence, hope and despair, love and rage. He had survived a childhood in chaos, poverty, and fear, and transformed it into creativity and magnetism. But the world he navigated was ruthless, and the very fame that lifted him towards stardom also placed him squarely in the crosshairs of forces far beyond his control. By the mid-1990s, Tupac Shakur had become a household name, his music resonating far beyond the Bay Area, beyond the West Coast, and into the very soul of America. Yet the next chapters of his life would reveal a world darker than his lyrics, a reality where loyalty and betrayal, life and death, would collide with devastating force. And as the glare of the spotlight grew ever brighter, Tupac could sense the tension, the threats, the shadows creeping closer. Every phone call, every encounter, every lyric carried a weight he could feel in his bones. The rise had been extraordinary, but Tupac Shakur's story was only just beginning. The world knew his music, but it did not yet know the storm that was coming. By the mid-1990s, Tupac Shakur had risen from the streets of Harlem and Oakland to the summit of hip-hop, his voice echoing across America and beyond. He was no longer merely a talented young man. He had become a symbol, a living embodiment of rebellion, charisma, and the raw poetry of urban life. His lyrics were not just music, they were declarations, challenges to society, and mirrors reflecting the struggles of millions. He could command a stadium with a single verse, yet he was equally capable of making listeners weep with the tenderness of his words. The duality of his nature, ferocity and sensitivity, defiance and vulnerability set him apart, creating a magnetism that few could resist and many envied. The world was watching, and Tupac thrived under its gaze. After the release of Tupac Now, critics debated his work, some branding it inflammatory, others praising its revolutionary honesty. But Tupac did not care about the critics. He cared about the people, about the youth whose lives mirrored his lyrics. He toured relentlessly, his performances electric, his presence commanding. Every stage became a platform not just for music, but for social commentary. He spoke of police brutality, poverty, systemic oppression, and the struggles of African American youth, weaving these themes seamlessly into his art. And then came the signing with Death Row Records, the moment that would catapult Tupac into superstardom. Suge Knight, a figure as controversial as Tupac himself, recognized the raw talent and raw energy in the young rapper. Under Death Row, Tupac found a platform that amplified his reach, providing production, connections, and an audience eager for the intensity he radiated. Yet the world he entered was not purely artistic. The industry was rife with rivalry, greed, and danger. Tupac, fearless and outspoken, often found himself at the eye of storms he had no choice but to confront. His albums became milestones of his career. Me Against the World captured a period of introspection, reflecting both the pressures of fame and the burdens of survival. He rapped about betrayal, loss, and the complexity of life in a way few could emulate. The album's depth was matched by its commercial success. It was proof that Tupac could command the mainstream without compromising his truth. Fans celebrated him, critics lauded him, and enemies, both personal and systemic, took notice. But fame came with a price. Every word Tupac spoke, every action he took, was scrutinized. Paparazzi, journalists, and even rivals in the industry watched him constantly. His every relationship, romantic or platonic, became fodder for headlines. The media painted him alternately as a genius, a rebel, and a dangerous provocateur. The pressure mounted, and Tupac's personality, already layered with intensity and contradiction, began to show cracks. His influence extended beyond music. Acting provided another avenue for his creative expression, and Tupac seized it. He appeared in films such as Juice, where he portrayed a young man struggling with morality, power, and the temptations of violence. His performances revealed a depth that few in Hollywood could match, and he was soon recognized as a force, not only in music, but on the screen. His charisma, once confined to the stage and recording booth, now filled cinema halls. Yet this visibility only intensified scrutiny. Meanwhile, the West Coast rap scene was simmering with tension. Tupac's growing fame was inseparable from rivalries that had been brewing for years, and the East Coast-West Coast divide was beginning to crystallize. These tensions were fueled by competition, but also by geography, gang affiliations, and media sensationalism. Tupac, fearless and outspoken, became a lightning rod in this conflict. Every word he spoke, every album he released, was analyzed for hidden messages, perceived insults, and signs of loyalty or betrayal. At the heart of Tupac's fame, however, was his relationship with his fans. He was unflinching in his dedication to the people who supported him, often visiting communities, speaking to youth, and using his platform to amplify voices that otherwise went unheard. Yet, paradoxically, he was isolated by that same fame. Friends and allies sometimes feared the intensity he carried. Enemies wanted to exploit it. His life became a balancing act between influence and danger. Connection and caution. By this time, Tupac's personal life was equally turbulent. Romantic relationships, friendships, and feuds all intersected with his growing notoriety. Yet through it all, he maintained a core philosophy: survival, expression, and impact. Every lyric, every public statement, every performance was infused with urgency. He was not content merely to entertain. He sought to provoke thought, incite reflection, and, at times, spark controversy. One of the defining moments of this period was the notorious 1994 shooting incident in New York, where Tupac was ambushed, robbed, and shot multiple times. The incident became both a catalyst and a turning point. It hardened him, intensified his public persona, and sowed seeds of suspicion and paranoia. From that day on, Tupac carried the memory of the shooting not just as trauma, but as a warning that the world was watching, waiting, and capable of extreme violence. Following his release from prison, he aligned more closely with Death Row Records, where Suge Knight became both mentor and protector. But this partnership came with strings of expectations, obligations, and entanglement in the very rivalries Tupac had previously only skirted. The lines between art, survival, and vengeance blurred. Tupac's music reflected this duality. Tracks that spoke of loyalty, betrayal, love, and anger, each word steeped in the tension of his reality. By now, the East Coast-West Coast rivalry was no longer abstract. Media coverage fanned the flames, and Tupac, ever fearless, engaged publicly and privately in the conflicts. Words exchanged in interviews, magazines, and lyrics became part of a larger war, a complex dance of reputation, fear, and retaliation. Friends and allies sometimes cautioned him, warning of danger, but Tupac's philosophy was clear. He would not be silent, he would not compromise, and he would not allow fear to dictate his voice. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Tupac remained committed to his art. Albums such as All Eyes on Me elevated him to the status of legend. He became the face of West Coast rap, a beacon for those who saw in him both courage and honesty. Yet the more his star rose, the more dangerous the shadows became. Rivalries deepened, threats multiplied, and the intensity of fame itself became a battlefield. Every concert, every studio session, every public appearance carried an undercurrent of risk. Tupac's life was lived in the eye of a storm fueled by fame, envy, and the violence that had always stalked him from the streets of Harlem to the clubs of Los Angeles. Even those closest to him began to sense the weight of inevitability, the sense that one day, the pressures converging around Tupac would erupt in tragedy. And as the world watched him shine, a darker narrative began to coalesce. Friends whispered warnings. Enemies plotted silently. Rivals sharpened their words and weapons alike. Tupac, ever perceptive, felt the tension, yet faced it head-on. He recorded, performed, spoke, and acted with the urgency of a man who knew life was fleeting. Fame had brought him everything he had dreamed of and everything that could destroy him. The stage was set. The music was booming, the streets were watching, and the countdown had begun. Tupac Shakur had achieved stardom, wielded influence, and commanded respect, but the forces swirling around him were growing more dangerous by the day. The feuds, the enemies, the media frenzy all were converging toward a single, dark inevitability. And so, as Tupac continued to rise, creating music that would endure forever, shadows gathered at the edges of his life. The West Coast's bright lights hid dangers unseen. His influence had become both shield and target. Every move he made was scrutinized, every word dissected, and every ally and enemy tested. The world applauded, but the storm was only beginning. The next chapter would be defined by tension, conflict, and threats that could not be ignored. The feud that had simmered for years was about to explode. Tupac's life, like his lyrics, was a narrative of survival and defiance, but the ultimate test loomed. One that would shake not just the rap world, but the entire globe. By the mid-1990s, Tupac Shakur had become a towering figure in hip-hop, a voice that could not be ignored, and a symbol whose every move reverberated far beyond the West Coast. But fame, while intoxicating, had its own dangers. The simmering feud between the East Coast and West Coast rap scenes, once a background tension, had now begun to take center stage. It was fueled by media sensationalism, personal slights, and a complex web of alliances and betrayals that few fully understood. Tupac's very name had become a flashpoint, a rallying cry for fans. and a provocation to rivals. The tension intensified after Tupac's 1994 shooting in New York. On the night of November 30th, he was ambushed in the lobby of a recording studio, robbed, and shot 5 times. The event left him physically wounded and emotionally hardened, deepening a sense of paranoia that had always lurked beneath his charisma. Friends and associates whispered warnings. Enemies watched and waited. The streets, the industry, and even law enforcement became part of a charged, volatile ecosystem where trust was scarce and betrayal could be fatal. While recovering, Tupac's public persona began to shift. He adopted a harder edge in interviews and lyrics, his words often laden with veiled threats and pointed commentary on his rivals. East Coast rappers, particularly those associated with Bad Boy Records, became frequent targets in his music. The media amplified every incident, turning lyrical sparring into personal warfare. Each diss track, each public comment was dissected and magnified, escalating tensions beyond control. Back in Los Angeles, Tupac aligned closely with Suge Knight and Death Row Records, a partnership that offered both protection and peril. Suge's own reputation for ruthlessness and influence meant that Tupac's every action now carried strategic weight. He was no longer just a rapper. He was a player in a larger power struggle, one that involved not only music but money, reputation, and survival. The environment was unforgiving, and every day brought new threats, both subtle and overt. During this period, Tupac became increasingly vigilant. Surveillance, security concerns, and street-level intelligence became part of his daily life. He was aware of potential ambush, of jealous rivals, and of people he thought he could trust who might ultimately betray him. His charisma remained, but it was tempered with caution. His intensity, once purely artistic, now carried a sharper edge. Friends noticed the change, the way he scanned rooms, the way he spoke in coded language about loyalty and danger. Tupac was preparing himself, consciously or unconsciously, for a confrontation he could feel approaching. The feuds extended beyond music. Personal conflicts intertwined with street rivalries, legal troubles, and even romantic entanglements. Every encounter, every night out, every concert could become a flashpoint. Tupac's life was increasingly a balancing act, a constant negotiation between public persona, private alliances, and the lurking threat of violence. He understood that in this world, fame was not a shield, it was a magnet for danger. The rivalry with East Coast rappers, particularly with the notorious B.I.G. and Bad Boy Records, intensified. Media outlets framed it as a war, exaggerating slights, highlighting conflicts, and turning words into bullets. Tupac, always perceptive, recognized the power of narrative. He understood that public perception could be as lethal as any weapon. His lyrics, interviews, and performances became tools of influence. Yet each declaration also drew him deeper into the vortex of confrontation. Meanwhile, Tupac's influence did not fade. Music released posthumously soared on charts. The Don Illuminati, the 7-Day Theory presented a darker, more introspective Tupac, full of prophecy, anger, and reflection on life and death. Fans dissected every lyric, searching for clues, reading his words as both confession and forewarning. Every verse became a puzzle, every line a testament to his awareness of mortality and the world's dangers. And then came the rumors, whispers that refused to die. Some believed Tupac had faked his own death, escaping into secrecy to avoid the violence he had predicted. Others argued for gang involvement, retribution, or complex conspiracies linked to the music industry and law enforcement. Las Vegas itself became a city of legend, with the scene of the shooting immortalized in street stories, documentaries, and fan speculation. Yet through all the conjecture, one truth remained undeniable. Tupac Shakur's life, art, and influence had left a mark impossible to erase. He had spoken for those without voices, challenged the powerful, and illuminated the darkness with unparalleled intensity. His death was tragic, shocking, and unfinished in the eyes of the world, leaving a void felt across generations. The night of August 7th, 1996, became not just a tragedy, but a symbol of a turning point in music, culture, and the public consciousness. Tupac's legacy was cemented in the mystery of his final hours, the unresolved questions, and the enduring fascination with the man who had dared to live love, and fight in a world that often seemed bent on destruction. And as the neon lights of Las Vegas faded into memory, the echoes of gunfire and Tupac's voice lingered, haunting streets, studios, and hearts alike. The storm had arrived, the fury of life and death intertwined, and the world would never forget the boy from Harlem who had dared to speak truth to power, and whose absence became a question the world still seeks to answer. Tupac Shakur's death on September 13, 1996, did not mark an end. It marked a transformation. The world mourned a young man who had lived at the extreme edges of creativity and danger, a life full of contradictions, brilliance, and conflict. Yet, even in death, Tupac's presence refused to fade. His words, his music, and the legend he had built became immortal, haunting both the streets he once knew and the minds of millions who had followed his journey. Almost immediately, questions began to overshadow grief. The murder investigation was fraught with inconsistencies, conflicting testimonies, and dead ends. Witnesses disappeared or changed stories, evidence was mishandled, and authorities seemed unable or unwilling to fully untangle the threads. The world was left with theories, rumors, and speculation, each more tantalizing than the last. Was it an East Coast-West Coast rivalry gone too far? A personal vendetta? A gang-related execution? Or something far more complex, hidden behind layers of deceit and fear? The media amplified every theory, turning Tupac's life and death into a global spectacle. Conspiracy theories flourished, fueled by the secrecy surrounding the investigation, the high-profile nature of the victim, and the dramatic elements of his life. A poet, a revolutionary, a rapper, and an actor, all rolled into one, silenced at the peak of influence. Some even claimed Tupac had faked his own death, retreating into obscurity to escape the inevitable fallout of the rivalries he had endured. Photographs, alleged sightings, cryptic messages, and songs all became evidence in a legend that refused to be confined to the facts. Yet amid the mystery, Tupac's influence grew exponentially. Posthumous albums, including the Don Illuminati, the 7-Day Theory, continued to dominate charts, resonating with a generation grappling with inequality, violence, and ambition. Every lyric, every verse seemed prophetic, as if Tupac had anticipated the turbulence that would follow him into history. His art became a tool of cultural memory, a testament to his life, struggles, and insights. Tupac's impact extended far beyond music. Artists across genres, activists across nations, and ordinary people inspired by his words carried his spirit forward. Hip-hop itself was transformed by his influence, reshaping the landscape with introspection, social critique, and an unflinching honesty. Beyond the industry, Tupac became a symbol of resistance and resilience, proof that one voice, amplified by passion and talent, could change the conversation, challenge the powerful, and endure beyond mortality. The unsolved nature of his murder became part of the myth. Books, documentaries, and countless articles attempted to piece together the puzzle, yet no definitive answer emerged. The mystery itself became a defining aspect of Tupac's legacy, an echo of the duality he had embodied in life: visibility and danger, truth and deception, love and rage. Fans debated endlessly, scholars analyzed lyrics for hidden meanings, and new generations discovered Tupac's work with the same intensity as those who had lived through his life. Even today, decades later, Tupac's influence is undeniable. Murals, tribute concerts, and commemorations celebrate his life. Social media amplifies his quotes and lyrics as mantras for resilience and defiance. Musicians, poets, actors, and artists continue to draw inspiration from the intensity and authenticity he embodied. The mystery of his death has become inseparable from his myth, a haunting that preserves both his memory and the questions the world still cannot answer. Yet beyond fame, conspiracy, and legacy, Tupac remains human. He was a son, a brother, a friend, and a fighter who experienced the full spectrum of life's beauty and cruelty. His poetry, his lyrics, and his actions continue to remind the world that art can challenge, heal, and inspire. He embodied contradictions, lived fiercely, and faced mortality with an awareness that lent his words weight and urgency. The boy from Harlem had become a symbol whose shadow stretches across decades. Tupac Shakur's story is one of brilliance and tragedy, influence and mystery. He lived under the glare of fame, the threat of violence, and the pressures of expectation, yet he spoke truth with uncompromising honesty. His death remains unsolved, his legacy immortal, and his spirit uncontainable. Every album, every verse, every tribute echoes with the voice of a man who dared to live at full intensity, who dared to challenge, who dared to dream. The world may never fully know the truth of that night in Las Vegas. The identity of the shooters, the motives behind the act, the chain of events that led to the fatal encounter all remain shrouded in mystery. And perhaps that is how Tupac intended it. His life, like his lyrics, was a challenge, a puzzle, a story that refuses easy answers. As we remember Tupac Shakur, we do more than mourn a lost life. We celebrate a force, a legend, a voice that continues to speak across time. He lived boldly, loved fiercely, and left questions the world is still trying to answer. In the shadows and lights of history, Tupac's spirit lingers, a reminder that brilliance can be fleeting, that injustice can haunt, and that even in death, some voices refuse to be silenced. And so, the boy from Harlem, the poet, the rebel, the icon endures. Tupac Shakur remains a mystery, a legend, and a cautionary tale wrapped in genius, controversy, and tragedy. His story is complete, yet incomplete. Known, yet unknowable. The streets, the studios, the fans, and the world continue to feel his presence, whispering the name Tupac Shakur, a name that will never fade, and a story that will never truly end.